Jim Ross, best wishes once again. He's undergoing colon surgery to help with colon cancer that he was diagnosed with very recently. And, obviously last week we gave our best wishes and, hope he does well and everything like that. But on AEW's pay-per-view on the weekend, they kept talking about it to the point it was startling. Like, it almost seemed like it was now or never, some real, close to the wire stuff and, how, like, serious this surgery is. Because they kept going back and, well wishes and hope you pull through and stuff like that, which, of course, is great to hear from AEW. We'll talk about WWE in a second. But Jim Ross said the following on his last podcast before going into surgery, which, as far as we know, he's having right now. He's having it this morning as we record this. We record this on a Tuesday morning, Dutch's time. So here's the quote.
No, I was at home. And I got a call from Steve Austin. And when we got off the phone, I looked at my phone and we'd talked for 43 minutes. 43 minutes. And here's what your friends do. They call you, they talk to you, and at the end of the conversation, they tell you they love you. And that's what Steve did. So that's what I got. And that cheered me up and it made me feel strong and vibrant. And he said, you're going to beat this and everything's going to be just fine. Just ride it out, tough it out. I said, oh, I'm going to. I'm going to put my uniform on and go play and give the doctor and the nurses everything they want. And hopefully they're going to do a good job.
But yeah, I mean, did you have any word of just how serious the colon cancer and the surgery was?
Well, Jim, you have my utmost faith in you, and you can beat this, and I hope you do. And my thoughts and prayers are with you, and I hope you're fine. And Jim always was a gentleman to me, always. And I never saw really Jim Ross get mad. I see him get irritated, but and sometimes he was funny as hell when he would get irritated, but you could tell he wasn't mad and all. And he had that Oklahoma accent would come through, and he would show that he was really upset. And actually it was funny. I didn't let him see me kind of chuckle at him, but man, he would just raise hell. But it was very, very entertaining.
What would irritate him? What were the things that got to him?
Well, he was the talent relations thing. So if anybody had a problem, guess who they'd run to? They'd run right to Jim. And Jim would have to sit there and listen to it and say, even if he couldn't do anything about it. He would have to make them think, well, yeah, now we know. And okay. Oh, I don't know if he hated the job, but he probably did hate talking to some of those guys, because some wrestlers are like, I don't mean to say this in a misogynistic manner, but they're women. They take a problem and just fret over it and obsess over it and go on and on. And by them doing that, they make it bigger than what it is. But that was his job, and probably it all boiled up a couple of times. And he wanted to say, I'm getting sick and tired of hearing about all this shit from these guys, blah, blah, blah. But only certain people would hear that. I happen to be, I consider myself a lucky one to have heard some of that sometime. He was hilarious. So, Jim, I want you to fight this, get better, and I hope that I get to talk to you soon.
Why did Jim do that role for so long? He was vice president of talent relations for like 8 years.
Because Vince gave it to him. That was his job.
But have you read his books?
I don't think
he was a workaholic. Like, he was working 100 hours a week.
Yeah, I don't think he had a choice. Vince wanted him to, and I guess he paid him to do. I guess he paid him for the announcing job, And I'm sure he paid him for the talent relations job. So he was getting paid for 2 jobs. No telling how much money he knocked down. You know, if the money's right, I'll sit there and listen to shit from guys all day long. I just plug my ears up and say, well, yeah, I hear you, man. I hear you. And I'll see what I can do for you.
Did you ever used to do the Jeff Jarrett thing where you'd always have that Bluetooth thing in his ear? I was, got a call, got to go.
I was the first one to call him on that. I said, take that blue light out of your ear. You say, Jeff, can I see you a minute? He'd point right to his ear and just keep walking, which was actually fairly inventive, I would think, or I thought at the same time. And I said, and I told him one time, I said, you're not talking to anybody. He says, and he just looked at me like, yeah, don't tell nobody, and kept going.
Back to Jim. He says he has no plans to retire and he wants to be AEW All In, which I think is, I don't know if it's July or August, but it's not too far away. So, you know, he's got designs to be back in the broadcast booth sooner or later.
Where is that going to be coming from?
Is it Texas? Is it Arlington?
Arlington, okay.
Yeah. So, right, okay, here's the thing. AEW mentioning constantly, because obviously he's contracted to AEW at the moment. You know, many goodwill wishes and stuff like that.
How much did they mention it?
Several times throughout the pay-per-view. They'll mention it more times today as this is broadcast on AEW Dynamite, I'm absolutely sure as well. So, yeah, you know, there's nothing but positivity coming from AEW's camp, obviously. Here's the thing. WWE has mentioned it 0 times. The only even hint that they've made mention to about Jim Ross is Pat McAfee said the word slobber knocker. And but didn't mention Jim Ross's name, which I'm almost wondering, has WWE told everybody whatever you do not mention Jim Ross, because we've got a phony wrestling war going on, and apparently that's more important than one of the most beloved people in wrestling history.
Well, normally WWE has never mentioned their opposition or their competition. They've never mentioned that. Now, since Jim went with AEW, now he goes from being one of their talents to one of theirs, and normally they don't mention anybody else like that. But in this case, I will go out and say, I think Jim, you know, transforms that ideology. I think, you know, since he was there for so long, and he was the voice of WWF and E. I think they could mention him, and I don't think they've actually said, "Hey, let's don't mention Jim Ross's name." I don't think they've done that.
I bet they would. I bet they genuinely would. I bet they would say, "Hey, don't mention Jim Ross out there because he's with the competition, etc." It's like it's 2025. It's not WCW. It's not life or death.
So you're saying that they're that hung up? I don't think they're afraid of AEW.
I don't think they are as well, but I think they're still that hung up on it. I genuinely think they are, because otherwise they would absolutely mention Jim Ross.
But to me, this was a Vince edict. I think don't mention the competition. I think and when Vince is gone, and I think, the Saturday night show. What was that called? The
Which
main
one?
event.
Collision. Saturday night's main event. Yeah.
And I think them mentioning his name wouldn't have hurt anything, but I don't know if they're under that instruction or not to mention anybody else's name. But I don't think it would hurt for them to acknowledge that he is sick, and for everybody to wish him well.
Yeah, it's funny because they'll mention AEW, or hint around AEW, like CM Punk and Ricky Starks and Ethan Page or whoever it might be. Yeah, for some reason. Here's the thing. Here's my theory is, you know, wrestling fans love Jim Ross pretty much universally. I'm sure a lot of the wrestlers really love Jim Ross as well. I've always got the impression that a lot of people who work with him in the office didn't appreciate Jim. And I don't know why. Is it just because he's too forthright? Or am I making that up? What do you think?
What was the question? Who didn't like him?
Well, do you think some people in the WWE office didn't like Jim? Because he always seemed to be the butt of some jokes. He didn't seem to be taken seriously at times. He You know, he was almost like Howard Finkel, but, you know, not quite on the Howard Finkel
You
level.
know,
It's been
and
bullied.
you know where that comes from?
Vince?
Vince. Because they treat the talent like Vince would treat the talent. And if Vince made a joke about them, people inside the office say, oh, well, this is something that he'll like. And they'll transform some of their comments to include Jim Ross just for Vince would like it, just to favor his attention.
We'll say, you know, best wishes to Jim. Hope he makes it to All In.